We're going to talk about security, but we're going to, instead of just rattling off the standards, we're going to talk about what you always talk about in a security presentation, which is the evolving threat landscape. So there's two things that are happening that have happened in the last, let's say, 18 months that are influencing three areas of information security where we're going to focus in this talk. So if we can go to the next slide there. So here's the three things that are happening. The first one is, you may have heard of botnets. It's a term we use to talk about a bunch of hacked devices that are controlled from one source by one person or one entity. So botnets are just much more common. They're much, and that makes them cheaper, right? Just basic economics on this. If you can see this chart here, just the number of participants in the various botnets has skyrocketed. So that's sort of step one. Item number two is that I got my numbers backwards. There's two things and three things. The AI, which I know we've talked about a lot today already. One of the things that AI is doing is it's enabling the bad guys to do things at scale that they used to have to do one at a time. And so what we're seeing is that things that used to be sort of small annoyances are becoming much bigger threats to us. And what those two seemingly small things have translated to for us is three areas where we are going to have to, or we are stepping up to address new types of security threats. And those areas are insider threats, content misappropriation, and the third is what I'm calling volumetric attacks. And we're going to go through those here now. So the first one is the insider threat. When we talk about insiders, we're talking about your employees, we're talking about your contractors, we're talking about your vendors, you're talking about people or entities that you've given additional access to, additional credentials to. So that has always been the biggest threat. Whenever I give one, I always talk first about the insider threat because it is persistently the biggest area of risk for all of us. 80+%, some studies say 99% of cyber incidents begin with social engineering, whether that's a phishing email or somebody left a USB hub in the parking lot. But that's almost all of the attacks that are successful start with social engineering. And when I talked about AI helping the bad guys in making social engineering easier, it's making them more able to broadcast rather than doing sort of one attack at a time. The other thing that's happening with the insider threat, which you may or may not know about, is the increase in remote worker fraud. You're hiring someone and you're not getting who you think you are. I saw a study that said 17% of managers say they've encountered that, which means how many people didn't know they were encountering that. It's a real problem, whether it's the person you interviewed isn't the person doing the work or they're misrepresenting themselves. So what you have there is, because of this changing environment, you have more of a risk for your already somewhat risky insider. Oh, and the other thing to remember, by the way, is a lot of times people feel safe, they feel insulated because they're not big enough to be attacked. Often attacks against large brands start as attacks against small brands, the supply chain attacks, right? So you can't attack the big companies, so you attack the company that provides their phone service. So we're all in somebody's supply chain, and so it's important to remember that you may not be the final target. Okay. The second thing that we're all facing is content misappropriation. So it used to be that the things I worried about for my customers on the web were like DDoS attacks and insiders and man in the middle and that sort of thing. But what we're seeing a dramatic increase in is bots or automated traffic gathering content from our sites, from our customers' sites for some reason, probably to train an AI, sometimes for other purposes. We'll talk about this later. But what's happening is that the trend on the web is that in a lot of cases, we're seeing at least as many, if not more, bots hitting our websites than humans. And that presents a couple of challenges, right? It presents the challenge of you manage that traffic differently on a technical level, but it also forces us to think a little bit differently about how are we presenting our content? What are we trying to protect? This particular area is, as I say here, an intimate kind of thing. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later because it doesn't feel faceless. It feels like it's targeting us. It's targeting our content, our bread and butter. And the third is what I call the volumetric. So there's two kinds of volumetric attacks. The first one is what we call DDoS, distributed denial of service. Used to be, I mean, it's not a new thing, but it used to be a lot harder for people to pull off, right? You had to have the botnet, you had to have the technical know-how, you were taking a risk of being caught and being penalized. That's really not the case now. These are screenshots that I took off of the dark web last week. Like somebody has a cute little logo. You can just go buy yourself a DDoS attack. And so that just means that it's much more common and much easier to pull off. And so we're seeing a lot more of them. The other thing that we're seeing is what I call the clumsy burglar, which is those crawlers and scrapers that I was talking about earlier that are coming to your site. They're automated. They're trying to do a job. They're trying to scrape your site and take your content, take your images for some purpose. The way they work the ability or has the tendency to bypass the kinds of performance improvements or protections that you put in place if your traffic is human. And so if those bots are not tuned, if those bots care more about getting the content than obeying the directives that you have in your website, it's going to feel like an attack. That's not what it's trying to do, but it's going to have the same result. You're going to have what appears to be a volumetric attack with the same implications, the same resource exhaustion, even though all they're trying to do is copy your website. Okay. So we've talked about the threats and the risks. Now let's talk about how we can use Brightspot and make this reduce the risk. We can't really make it go away. So the first one is going to be, I love these images. Go ahead. So the first one is going to be this insider threat, right? So the way this section is set up is I'm going to talk about something that happened recently, and then we'll talk about how Brightspot can help. So all of these are real stories. First one, we had a customer report that we talk about this content scraping. Somebody scraped their site, pulled the content, ran it through a translator, not a translator, but reworded it. Original content was in English, new content was in English, different content but saying the same thing, and then they published a cloned site. I can't figure out why you would do that, but that's what happened. And so we noticed this because, I mean, you're not looking for this sort of thing, you sort of stumble across it. I am talking about a different slide than what we're looking at, aren't I? Yes, I am. Okay. Tiff, can you jump ahead to this one that I'm actually talking about? I'm sorry. Nope. I'm just making this worse. Nope. It's the third one. Yep, that was it. I'm very sorry, guys. Yeah, so this is the derivative site, right? So I don't understand why they were doing it, who the bad guys were, but they several times throughout this quarter, we've seen duplicated sites copied and restood up. So when we talk about what Brightspot's doing to help, this is the next slide. What we're doing on the Brightspot side is we have this offering for our existing customers, which is you, that we call Brightspot Fortify, which is we've leveled up our baseline protections for websites to address this kind of things, they're very difficult to pick up from a technology perspective. It's very difficult to tell because a scraper kind of looks like a human unless it's misbehaving. So when we talk about the new layer of security, the new Brightspot Fortify, part of it is increasing the perimeter security, improving it the best that we can. But the second thing is that we're starting to do reviews, just looking at the traffic, looking for anomalies, because this is where this is where we stumble across these content thieves. What I need you to do in this space is, and this is critically important, is you have to understand what your tolerances are for your content, how your content is going to be used, because every one of us has a different reason to be putting our content on the web, to be putting our content on social media. And depending on what your goals are for that, how you protect your content, how you view your content as an asset is going to be different. So the first thing you have to do when you're dealing with content misappropriation is think about what is misappropriation, right? If you're in a position where if somebody copies your message and puts it somewhere else, that's actually going to improve your posture. Maybe you want to figure out how to facilitate that sort of copying or redistribution. If you're in the business of having being the expert in a particular field, then you certainly don't want that content to wander off and get someone else's logo on it. So it's very important to think first about what am I trying to protect? And then talk to your Brightspot account lead or me, and we'll think about what we need to do to protect specifically your content or set up watching for misuse of your content. But it's important to have a point of view about this. All right, Tiff, can you jump back? I'm sorry, to the lady with the keys.
Yes, I can. And we actually did get a really interesting question that I wanted to share.
Okay.
What's the difference in how a company should think about security if you're a media company? Is that going to be a lot different than if you're a B2B software company? I thought that was an interesting question.
It is different, and that drives to this point that I'm talking about here about having a point of view, is I think at the very highest level, we're all responsible for information and we're trying to figure out how to protect that information, but you don't want to like put it in a safe and lock it, right? Because that information is valuable for a reason. So it very much, and it's more and more important as AI and botnets and the dark web start taking more hold, is to really understand, to think about it as a treasury. Like, what is your information treasury? What are the purposes of that information? And then you can zoom out. You can take a look at who are my partners, what's my integration strategy, like how am I publishing my content, what's my social media strategy, how am I controlling how my content gets onto TikTok. But going back to I saw in the prior speech talking about painting your ideal person and then making decisions based on that. You have to really think about your information and understand what it's for and what its value is before you can start thinking about how to secure it. Because it is going to be different for a media company than it is for a B2B company, than it is for a consumer brand. It's just it's different. That's why people like me get to give you talks like this.
Awesome, thanks.
Yep. So now I'll actually read the slide instead of just babbling. So we did have, and this happens not very frequently, but it does happen, where a customer calls me and says, I have content on my website and I didn't put it there. Like there's content appearing on my site. This is the nightmare scenario, right? Because that sounds like a compromised CMS or something. It's bad. In this case, it ended up being that they let an employee go, but they didn't revoke the access, which is bad, right? You don't want to do that. And then, I'm not going to read into whether that was a disgruntled employee or the credentials were compromised, but it's very important to remember who you've given the keys to and what those keys are so that you can take them away when they are no longer needed. So if we go to the next slide here, Brightspot solves this problem in a couple of ways. The first one is, I say this once a week, Brightspot has very granular user and role permissions, and we should use them, right? So you should think about who has the ability to do what in your CMS and constrain their role so that that's all that they can do. It's called role-based access control. And then make sure you're slicing the right people into the right roles. We also have very customizable workflows, right? So it's not like everybody has the publish button. You can route your publish through whoever you want. You can figure out how you want to switch the train as it's going out of the station. And so we give these tools to you because we think that role-based access control is critical, and we want to make sure that you're using it in a way to help minimize the effect of your insider threat. So the first one is, this is a pain. No one likes to do it, but you have to do user reviews and you have to do them regularly. Who has what access? Do they still need that access? Have they used that access recently? You have to do that. The second thing, and this goes back to a comment that Ravi made earlier, I suggest to my customers that you require at least 2 human approvers for any high-risk change. So you may have an AI, you may have 3 AIs, you may have a photo editor, and you may have a page editor. I recommend there's at least 2 humans, because that's going to prevent you from falling into the AI just publishing trap, which none of us want to fall into, and I don't think anybody does that on purpose. But it also gives you the opportunity to catch if one of the, if you have a human user who's been compromised or is sort of veering out of their lane. So we have those tools. It's very important to use them, to think about them, not just for your business workflow, but also for how you're securing your content. And then the third one, this is my clumsy burglar story. And it is exactly what you think it is. So you have a bot or a bot net that's trying to grab as much content as possible. And the way it does that is it's like following search links and it's following pagination. And what that ends up doing is it ends up defeating the performance capabilities of the CDN. It ends up like exhausting the servers themselves because there's so many requests and all those requests are unique. That was not the goal of the bot, but that is what ended up happening. And so we see this, it affects sites. I saw this happen this morning. It's actually surprisingly common. And so when we think about this problem, Tiff, next slide, please. I mean, Brightspot is very scalable and it's very good at scaling under additional traffic. This happens all the time. Like right now, probably a dozen of your sites are scaling up or scaling down because of something that's going on. That's day-to-day operation. So a lot of this gets absorbed. So we see it, but you don't know what's happening. That's good. The second thing that we have to do though is and I talked about this, ramping up those security protections, ramping up the new baseline of security to be aware of the fact that volumetric attacks are more frequent, they're more substantive, and they're more sophisticated. And so we're partnering with AWS and GCP to put together solutions that are cognizant of this new threat. Here's what you have to do. Make sure, I talked earlier about how they're not necessarily attacking you, right? You could be a supply chain. Make sure your supply chain have the same level of care that you do, right? Hold Brightspot accountable, hold all your other partners, your vendors, hold them accountable, because if those protections are not in place upstream, it's just going to come rolling down to you. And the other thing is, when you think about these things, make sure when you're doing procurement that you think about security as part of the sign-off process. That's just good. So one last thing, going back to, we talked about the content misappropriation, how this is very personal to us, right? What if you're a brand? What if you're a media company? What if you're a B2B company? The thing about the content misappropriation is it's happening to enough people that there are tools emerging to address it. Right? I talk to folks all the time about bot control and what we can do with bot control. I tried to include in the Fortify package like a solution for bot control, but it's impossible because you have to have a point of view, because it is not one size fits all. The tools are out there, but you have to really know what you're doing. So I talked about it again, twice, 3 times now already. Understand what your content strategy is, understand your content treasury and how you want to protect it, and how you want to dole that out. And some of the tools that are popping up out there are not really a solution, right? So just be a little bit wary of the snake oil. If somebody has a click here to protect you from bots, or a click here so you can start charging AIs for accessing your content, ask more questions, right? There are legitimate solutions out there, but the legitimate solutions involve you involving your technology team, involving your, what is your protections. There's no solution that I've seen where you can just click a button and make the problem go away. So just be cautious if those folks show up at your door. All right. How did I do on time? I think we're good. Yep.
You did wonderful. We actually have time for Q&A. Habib gets the gold star for timing his session out perfectly. So go ahead and put some questions in if you have some questions that you'd like to get answered. We've got literally the security expert here with us. One question we already have, David, what is one of the most common security threats that you're seeing with Brightspot customers?
So my answer to that is always think about the insider, right? That's always my answer, because the phishing, nasty emails. We're all getting text messages now. Like the ease with which people can make customized attacks to make me want to click a link in an email is the most important risk. And that's not just for CMS companies, but for everybody. So that's the most important thing for information security, bar none. For CMSs, like I think I'm personally more worried about these bots. Like that's what I'm concerned about. And the reason I'm concerned about it is they're harder to protect against. They're harder to identify. They're literally designed to bypass all of the protections that people like me are going to recommend. And so it's kind of like a race to the bottom on that stuff. That's not quite the same as somebody hacking your website, right? It's a little bit more subtle. It's a little bit less scary than, than just what we used to call hacking. But it's what I'm most concerned about that's specific to the business that we're in.
Right. And Grant, in chat, we have so hacking the person is still the most effective attack method.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yes. Any other questions from our crowd? You have literally the security expert here. You can chat him in too. I'm looking at the chat in real time. David, I have a question for you. Like for me, being a marketer, oftentimes, security was kind of an afterthought for me. I just, did whatever the security team told me to do, and I still,
Yeah.
what you guys tell us to do. What's one thing that you wish that, content experts and marketers, so folks that are not actually on the security side or the tech side of the house, what's one thing that you wish those folks knew about security that would keep companies more safe?
I think what's important is knowing what you're trying to accomplish, right? So if I'm a security professional and my job is not to, make Tiff's job harder, although I do try to make Tiff's job harder. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to enable her to get what she needs to get accomplished. And the more I understand what that is, right? I'm trying to reach these people. I'm trying to diversify from web traffic into other sources. I'm trying to adapt AI into my workflow. Just be aware that the more transparent you are with what your goals are and what you're trying to accomplish, the more you'll be able to partner with your IT teams, your security teams, versus, just having everything fall apart when something goes wrong, right? Because then I don't know what Tiff's trying to get accomplished or what Maria's trying to get accomplished. Now, Maria and I talk literally every week. I know exactly what we're trying to do on the website, what we're trying to do with the content. And so I can make sure that we're doing the right things to protect her without restraining her ability to achieve what she's trying to accomplish.
Right. And we do really appreciate that. And both. So we got a really great question from John Barrow. How are you enabling administrators to know when a user has left and should be removed? Is it reports on last access, reports on what users have touched and when?
So that's a great question. So the first thing is we strongly recommend that if you have an identity protection, an IDP, if you have an Okta or L1 login, you should integrate Brightspot with that so that what you're doing is you're inheriting from upstream the managing of who and what, right? So here at Brightspot, if someone leaves, it takes us almost no time at all. We remove them from our one login system, and they are thus removed from a number of other things, including Brightspot. So that helps. Having that there helps, give you the assurance that you're not sort of off on your own. I am talking internally to folks like Ping about some features to help editors, to help administrators sort of see this in their Brightspot console. So it's not officially in the roadmap, but I think it's a good idea, which is to start surfacing those things in an easier place for administrators to see, to say like, who hasn't logged in the last 30 days, right? That's a good thing to know. Or who's I don't know, who's whatever, right? Like what roles are not being used, what publishing actions seem to be common. All these things are available in Brightspot. You can go find all of these things relatively simply, but I'd like to surface those. But the most important thing you can do is inherit the authentication from an upstream so that whatever your IT team is doing to manage identities, you're just sort of inheriting that and you don't have to worry about it yourself.